Renoites listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of Renoites. My name is Conor McQuivey. I am your host. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Today's guest on the podcast is City Councilman Devon Reese. He is the at-large City Council member. We had a great conversation about all kinds of things. Talked about what it's like to be on the City Council, the challenges of running a campaign, some current issues around homelessness and development. We talked about Pride. Pride is coming up. June is Pride Month. Really great conversation. Fantastic to have Devon on the show, and I am so appreciative. Before we get into the interview today, a quick note. You might know that I host trivia nights for DJ Trivia here in town. I'm at multiple venues around town, and I'm really excited to be working with DJ Trivia and helping promote them on the show now. So I would invite all of you, if you have not gone to play DJ Trivia, to check it out. It's fun. It is free. I host at several venues around town, so if you want to see me in person, that's a good way to do it. Please check out DJ Trivia online at djtrivia.com for all of our locations, or follow DJ Trivia on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Every day we post the clue of the day, where you can get bonus points. We're also starting our league season, which is free to participate in. All you need to do is play at the same venue with the same team name, and you are automatically participating in a league that has a championship at the end of the season. So check it out. I hope that I will see you at one of my games. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions. It's Conor, CONOR, at Renoites.com. And now, without any further ado, this week's guest, Devon Reese. Devon Reese, thank you so much for coming on Renoites. I am so excited to have you as a guest on the show. I think you're my biggest guest so far, so it's exciting to have one of our city councilmen.
Well, that's a very kind intro, but I'm a pretty small player in the scope of the universe, so hopefully you'll have some real guests at some point in time.
Eventually. My big dream, I haven't shared this on the podcast, but if I continue to grow, I'm getting more and more listeners every week and great guests all the time. My hope is that if I keep doing the show week after week, that at some point it'll be big enough that I can interview like some actually really big names or whoever. When, we have a presidential candidates come here and stuff, and if I'm the guy in Reno to talk to, that would be really rad. So stuff like that would be really cool. But in the meantime, city councilman is, a good start.
Well, and my guess is that given your heart and effort that you're putting into it, you'll get where you want to go.
I hope so. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what a city councilman does and doesn't do, because I think that there's this idea that the city council makes all the decisions for the city all the time, and you're the go-to people for anything that's happening in Reno. But I don't know that that's actually in the scope of what a city council person does. Can you just tell me a little bit about what a city council person is and what isn't it, and why do you do it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, especially for folks who are perhaps interested in city stuffs, but they don't exactly know how we fit in. So I like to tell people that it's really driven by two things. One is our charter. So the city of Reno has a charter, and that charter lays out expressly what the kinds of things that the city is responsible for. And so it includes things that you would, think are typical, like police and fire, business licensing, property and zoning related questions within the city of Reno. It also includes provision of sewer services, and then it includes something like pretty pedantic, which is the provision and organization of a municipal band. And we don't do a very good job of that because I've never seen the municipal band. But those are really the things that the city is allowed to participate in by state law. I think one of your prior guests, Mike Houghton, had mentioned that we're a Dillon's Rule state. And so the things that the city of Reno is allowed to do are the things which the state has told us we are allowed to do. In some states, cities and counties have far greater powers, and they're essentially their own little kingdom. We have only the powers which are expressly given to us by the state of Nevada. So that's the sort of starting point, the charter. And then I think, as you can imagine, we are no longer a sleepy little town of 50 or 60,000. We're hurtling headlong towards 300,000 people. And when you have 300,000 people, you start to grow. And some growing pains are good and easy, and other growing pains are really painful and hard. So when you think about what we can do, you look at the charter. And when you think about what we we can't do, you're really talking about things like, and this is a hot issue for us now, but you're talking about how do we provide care for our unsheltered population? What role do we have in mental health? These are big questions and important questions, but sometimes we are ill-equipped at the city to deal with them because we're not set up to deal with them, and we're not legally able to deal with them in some ways. So that's probably the biggest area. And of course, we get confused a lot because people want to know what my position is on education policy and CRT. These are things that, although interest me as a human being, we don't really have a lot to do with them at the city council level. And so sometimes people are just, they're fumbling for understanding what your role is in the broader sense, because we have a city, a county, a state, a federal government, right? Layers of different kinds of governments. We also have, Washoe County School District. We have different boards and commissions that deal with things like water policy. So we have Truckee Meadow Water Authority. We have the Flood Project. We have Western Regional Water. I mean, everyone seems to do their own piece of it, and we have some small role at times, but oftentimes some of the things that matter most to people, we don't have anything to do with. So we try to stay in our lane, or at least I do, and I think it's important that we focus on our core services and what our job is vis-a-vis the people that put us into office to begin with.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think, because people are looking to you to answer those questions and people come to you and say, what is the city doing about this? What is the city doing about that? How much of your job is actually managing these things and making these decisions versus the messaging and communication to people? Because I think people do see the city council as the go-to for what's going on in town. Whether or not you're able to control it, I think the messaging often comes from the city. So where do you see your role as the getting stuff done versus the communicating about what's going on, and also your own views in that too, because even if you don't have control over something, you do have influence, right?
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to undersell or oversell what we can accomplish. I think a good example I'll give you is during the pandemic, I have people, and continue to this day to have people who reach out to me to say, what can you do to help me, your constituent, with navigating unemployment benefits? And the answer is not a whole lot, but surprisingly, in some cases, quite a bit, because we are in a position of actual or apparent authority where we can sometimes make the call, right? So I've had constituents who've reached out and said, hey, it's been 6 weeks. I can't get unemployment benefits. Can you help me? And so we find a way, right? We find a way to the right person who might be at the Department of Education, Training, and Rehabilitation, and we have them elevate a constituent's matter, right? So in that way, we are in a position to use the power that we have to help people. And sometimes we don't communicate that well about it, because your question really asked two parts, both what could we do and what also how do we communicate about it. For my part, this job is a full-time job. It's definitely more than 40 hours a week, although it's intended, I suppose, for some to be a part-time job. Some of the council members, including myself, do have other professional vocations or occupations. I am a lawyer by profession, and so I continue to practice law, although just not as much. Some of the council members do not have any other outside employment, and this is their sole responsibility. And so you just kind of balance what you can in the confines of the hours that you have in front of you, and you communicate effectively as you can. For my part, I try to communicate as effectively as I can by, texting and Facebook and Twitter and trying to put out, some newsletters. I respond to all my constituent emails myself. Every council member kind of deals with their own communication policy their own way. We as council members also have access to, a comms team at the city of Reno, which is an outstanding group of folks who work very hard. We have what are called liaisons. Each of the council members is assigned to a liaison, and that liaison is supposed to help you interface with the public and meet the varying needs that people bring to you. So we have help. It's not just me trying to do a thing, although for my part, I am the one responding on Facebook. I am the one who's sending text messages to you. I'm the one who's answering the phone. So you do your best with what you can.
Yeah, I appreciate your responsiveness. I've noticed, especially on Facebook, you respond to comments. It's not just you'll post something and then people talk amongst themselves in the comments. You're there engaging in actual discussion with people, which I appreciate that sense of accessibility.
Well, I appreciate that. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Obviously, I'm a person and I'd like to have some time to myself and my family and my husband, my kids. But, people have a right to have access to you. They put you into the position of power and trust, and you are making decisions that impact their lives. So when they reach out to you at, 5 a.m. and want to ask a question, if I'm awake, I'm answering,
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to pursue city council and local government in general? Why did you think that was a good venue and a way for you to make a difference? What was your hope for running for city council, and how's it going? Is it what you expected it to be? Are you making the impacts that you wanted to? What's that experience been like?
Yeah, another good question. Very thoughtful. For my part, my journey to political life probably began, I don't know, we'll say 8, 9, 10 years ago. And basically what I observed is that the job I was doing, which was as a lawyer, as I said, a lot of the solutions became political, right? I had clients who would come to me with a thing that, a dispute, a happening, a whatever, and they would say, fix this for me. And I reached into the toolbox to figure out which tools I could use. And I realized pretty quickly that, litigation, which was my background, was not always the best solution for the kinds of things that my clients were bringing to me. And so the job became very political around me. So I started spending more time with other folks who were in varying levels of government. I'm also the general counsel for a number of small government entities. So I'm essentially the Carl Hall, but to other entities. And so those clients sort of needed a different kind of skill set. And so the job was getting very political around me. And I, as many people do, got sort of volunteered to run for political office. And so I ran unsuccessfully for the state Senate in 2016 and really learned a lot about myself and about being a person in the public eye. I was not elected in that race. And so, but I sort of understood the impact that one could have if one was elected as a result of that. And so I did not run in 2018 for another office. There just wasn't anything that was the right fit for me. And then there was a vacancy on the city council in 2019 when then Councilmember David Bobzien went into the new Sisolak administration in Carson. So he left the city council to take a full-time job in Carson, where he continues to do good work in the area of energy policy and natural resources. So I put in my application. I think there were, 150, 200 applicants, something like that. And they kind of winnowed down the number of folks that they're interested in meeting with. And then I interviewed in front of the community and then in front of the council. And then, just by the grace of God, I suppose, I was selected. So I took over and served the remaining 18 months or so on that term of office. And then I put in for the office in my own right and was elected a year ago in 2020. So that's the first part of the journey, like how I got there. There's probably more poetic ways to describe the journey, but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. For my part, you asked a second part of the question, though, about kind of how I like it and what it's about. And it's been the absolute joy of my my adult life and professional service. I view the job as public service. It is certainly you are paid a salary, and it's a good salary. For me, I had a career and a job that was paying a good salary, and I had to set aside the most of that in order to do this. So, you have to view it as public service, and I do view it that way. And as a result, there are days where there are things that are not very interesting about the job. Sometimes you're talking about sewer rates and where sewer, how it impacts the community, and talking about shit all day is not a very fun thing, right? And so maybe I'm not as passionate about it, but there's a very important part about sewers and their capacity and how they drive the conversation about development. So you kind of peel back the layers of the parts that you are not as interested in, which for me is, where does shit go when you flush it down the toilet? And you find the places that you're interested in. And so for me, I just try to find ways to do as much good for as many people as we can for as long as we can. And in those moments, you realize that you can really actually make a difference. The things that affect people's lives most directly are the things that are happening locally. Sometimes I feel very removed from the federal government or how Congress approaches a thing, or even the president or the U.S. Supreme Court. But every day I know about people's, neighborhoods and potholes and the projects that they're interested in or opposed to. I think a lot about, what I want the future to hold for our community, and I'm happy to play a small role in it.
Mm-hmm. What was the campaigning experience like? Because that I know is or seems very frustrating or challenging to have a campaign experience where there's, like mudslinging ads, and it's local politics shouldn't be so dirty. But I feel like your campaign this last year was kind of gross. There was some bad ads and stuff that I thought was unfair. What's the experience like putting yourself not just in the public eye, but also making yourself kind of like a target of political opponents? How did that feel? And what's your take on the experience of running and dealing with the campaign part? And the plus sides too. Like, what's the enjoyable part of campaigning? I don't want it all to be negative. I'm sure that there's some enjoyable parts of that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to search my mind for those enjoyable parts. It's a little harder to come to. Campaigning is, at its core, is fundamentally about how you connect with people. And I like people. I like hearing their stories. I like sharing my story. I like hearing what their issues are and trying to listen very intently to what their hoped for solutions are. And I like trying to find a way forward for people who might have differing views. Campaigning during a pandemic was particularly challenging because a lot of politics is very local and retail, and that involves you knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, I'm Devon Reese and I'm running for city council. Tell me what you need me to know." And we couldn't do that this campaign. We certainly, in the 2016 campaign, I put a lot of miles in and knocked a lot of doors. This time out, it was much more, the focus was on, for me, I was a candidate who relied heavily on texting platforms. And those texting platforms were super useful, and I think are definitely part of, a future campaign that involves technology and the use of it and a way to connect with people, because a lot of people don't want you knocking on their door, right? Mm-hmm. So as for the negativity, my particular race was negative. I don't think it was negative by me. I didn't spend very much time thinking about or wondering about my opponent or his bad behavior. He's someone who I think Reno knows well and has, on 4 or 5 times now said they're not interested in that brand of politics. But it's hard because something you said resonates with me. Local politics, I hold a nonpartisan office, right? I am a proud and registered Democrat, but I'm also a Nevadan. I'm also a Renoite, like your podcast. And I think I hold very tight to that. I like to say, and I think people have heard me say it before, potholes don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. They just want to get filled. People want to have parks, and they want to have, clean air and drinking water, and they want to have shelter. All the other stuff that involves mudslinging is pretty ugly. I'm fortunate that, perhaps my disposition as a human being is that I have a pretty thick skin, so I don't get riled too much. Some of the things that happened in this particular campaign were, super gross. They attacked my family, a sibling of mine who has some very difficult and challenging life issues that involve mental health issues and drug addiction. And all of that stuff is really unnecessary. No one should have to go through that. And that's very difficult. The other thing I'll say about it is campaigns are very expensive, no matter how you cut it, no matter where you are. And until we have campaign finance reform, which I'm a fan of, I would like to see publicly financed campaigns. I have friends in other states who run for office who have some very strict campaign contribution limits, and they also have some very low limits where they're, capped out. I think a friend of mine only could spend about a total of $10,000, right? Well, that's real easy to go out and raise $10,000, I think, from small donors. And if that's the maximum you can both raise and spend, it means a lot of people who perhaps are locked out of political life can participate, and rightfully so. But we don't have that system here. And so campaigns are driven by the cost of billboards and signs and radio and technology and mailers, and all those things cost money. So in the end, you end up, raising money from wherever you can. Sometimes that ends up being developers who are supporting you, or unions. In the end, I think I view everyone as a special interest, whether that's you, Conor, and you're donating $100 to a candidate, or whether that's someone who's donating significantly more. And you just do the best you can, because there is a cost to it. In my particular race, too, I will say that my opponent claimed to self-fundraise. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. The idea that you don't have to go out and meet with constituents and earn their sort of trust and their resources. And it means that only wealthy people will be able to run for office. And I'm not down with that. I think that anyone should be able to run for office, and we should make it more accessible. We shouldn't have barriers related to that. So a lot of there to unpack, and I'm sorry for taking more time on this question than you probably wanted, but hopefully I've answered your question.
No, that was a great answer, because I remember you told me once that you think everybody should run for office in some role, just for the experience of, contributing to your community and understanding what it looks like from the inside, and contributing in that way. And I thought that was something pretty interesting. Do you still think that everyone should run for an office of some kind?
Yeah, I do think that everyone who wants to, right, should run. I don't think elections and politics are not for every person or personality type. I think if you're interested, sometimes people say, well, it's not your turn, or you need to wait till X person has done their stint and then you'll run when they're done. And I don't believe any of that. I think anyone who has a heart to serve should be able to put their name in. It's not that everyone is going to be successful and be elected. It's just that there is something very egalitarian and very, at its core, democratic in saying that everyone should have the opportunity to run. And of course, there's all sorts of different levels, right? You can run for the Sun Valley GID. You can run for the Verdi TV board, which is a weird one that we have here. I think it was on the ballot last time. I had to look at what that was. But, and of course, being an elected official is difficult. And there are some mental health challenges that come with putting yourself out in the public eye. And obviously, I think people have to think of their health first, their family's health and privacy. My children and my husband obviously did not sign up to run, but they get, kind of dragged along for the ride, whether willingly or unwillingly. And everyone has to have that honest conversation when they're deciding to run. What is your motivation for it? Is your family supportive? It's very difficult to run if you don't have the support of your family. So everyone should run, everyone should serve, but there are lots of ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I know you're really interested in is debate. So you were part of the kind of debate clubs in your history, and your family is all involved in debate. And that's something that's clearly very important to you, is debate and discussion and the way that we communicate. Why is debate so important to you? What's your history with it? Talk a little bit about debate and why it matters.
Yeah, this might be the rest of the hour, because I could talk about it for a long time. So I'm the product of Washoe County School District, and as are my three children. I showed up at high school as a kind of gangly, nerdy kind of dude, and showed up on the first day and was assigned to debate class, probably by choice. I thought I always wanted to be a lawyer, and this would be a great way for me to become one. I didn't have a lot of role models growing up in terms of people who had experience with higher education or being lawyers. I didn't come from a family of lawyers. But I kind of fundamentally knew or believed that debate might help me get to that place. So I showed up, and my debate coach was Sue Vaughn, an English teacher of some repute at McQueen High School. And I went on to have a very successful high school career, which I parlayed then into a scholarship to go to college, and probably was the way that my family was able to afford to go to college. Otherwise, I might not have had the opportunity, I think, to go to college. But so I got a scholarship and then debated through college and was very fortunate. In Nevada, I was, a state champion in a couple of different events, a couple of different debate type events. And then in college, I was also able to become a national champion in debate. And debate's a unique world. It has its own subculture, and people who do it are very into it, and they speak their own language. And then many years later, after sort of taking that and parlaying the college experience into law school, where I got to do some different kinds of debate called mock trial and moot court competitions, that kind of thing. When our children were about to hit high school, I went to McQueen High School, where my children would end up going, and said, hey, my first one is coming up here and like to know what you have for a debate program. And they said, well, we don't have one, but could you start one for us? And they were smart, because that's often the right way to do it. If they don't have something, they ask you to volunteer to build it. So we rebuilt the program at McQueen. My debate coach, Sue Vaughn, came out of retirement. She was still teaching there and was my children's first debate coach. And she is now since retired because she served with, for a long time in the Washington County School District, probably 35 years. And so I was a volunteer. So I was what I call the nights and weekend coach. I would work all day long, and then I would go and spend 3 or 4 hours each evening at the high school trying to build a debate program. And so we quickly built that program, in large part, of course, thanks to my own 3 children who became very passionate about it, into a national powerhouse. And so we, without a doubt, have had the most successful debate program in the state of Nevada that has ever existed. And our children then parlayed that into opportunities to go to college. So our oldest, Max, is at UNLV, debates for them. Our middle, KJ, is at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and debates for them. And as retired, they have decided rather that they wanted to be done with debate and do some other social things in life and enjoy the college experience. And then our son, who graduates tomorrow from McQueen High School, was a very competitive, successful high school debater, and he's going to the University of Southern California, where he'll debate for the USC debate team. So for us, in many ways, debate has been the passion of my lifetime. It certainly is a way that I have appreciated the opportunity to serve. I think over the years, I tried to count at one time, I've coached somewhere in the neighborhood of about 700 students. And, as if I weren't a lawyer, I hope by the grace of God, I would be a teacher. It's a noble profession. And I have certainly benefited in my lifetime from having been a debater and a public speaker. And of course, I want everyone to be a debater and a public speaker. So I tell my friends who have kids who are like 8, 9, 10 years old, I'm like, hey, I think that person, your child is going to be a debater, and they kind of look at you funny and they're wondering, well, what does that mean? I thought they were going to be a baseball player. Say, no, they're going to be a debater. We're going to figure it out. So I probably, I'm retiring now. I actually have told the school that I will not be coming back next year, in part because my duties as a city council member have just become much larger. So I just don't have the time to dedicate to it along with the other stuff I'm doing in life, but probably never get too far away from it. It absolutely is a core thing about who I am, and being a coach has been another joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I don't have that much experience with debate, but my understanding of it is it's not just about winning an argument or making the best argument for something. It really feels to be about understanding all the different sides of an issue and learning how to discuss and present ideas in ways that really make sense. So for people who aren't involved in the debate world, but want to have a more, thorough or nuanced understanding of things, what's a good way for a typical person, not everyone's going to join a debate club, for a typical person to kind of adopt some of that way of thinking that comes from the debate world?
Well, I think number one is we all ought to spend some time outside of our own echo chambers, right? Meaning that sometimes you have a view on a thing, but you haven't really seen it from the other side's view, and you haven't unpacked all the issues that are involved in it. With debate, you have to be both pro and con on any given issue. From round to round, in one round of a debate round, you might have to affirm a thing that you don't really agree with, but that's the topic that was given to you. And then in the very next round, you're saying the exact opposite thing that you said in the first round. And so in that regard, switch sides is what we call that, switch side debate. We all ought to be able to do that. And I suppose the way to do that is to build it based on research. At its core, debate is a research activity at which you later add a speaking component to it. But in order to be prepared to speak on it, you have to have researched it. And so I tell people, and of course, people come to, the kind of space where they need those skills at different points in time in their life, and not everyone will be a debater. But everyone can go to a library or get online and think critically about a topic, and also read a variety of source materials. If you only read one version of the world and that's all you see, it's going to be very difficult to have a very nuanced opinion about a thing. So sometimes you got to read, journals that would be considered left. Sometimes you got to read conservative journals. Sometimes you got to pick ones that are, particularly spin worthy. And you can find all sorts of materials to support almost anything. And certainly sussing out which are suspect or which are not valid materials is a skill you learn through that process. But really, for a person who, like you said, maybe has not been a debater, I think it starts with research and being willing to research an issue so thoroughly that you understand the arguments both for and against the thing, so that you can construct reasons why an argument is true or not, or you can, acknowledge the other person may have a valid point while pivoting to say it is something different than you believe in. Right. I think I've listened to all of your podcasts that you've done so far in Renoite, and you got really smart people who have lots of deeply held opinions on a thing. And what I observe about the folks you've had on the show is that they're willing to accept when they're right, and they're willing to acknowledge when they're wrong, and they're willing to do more research to dig on an issue. And I think that's important for all of us, especially because the world become very polarized and at times very hyper partisan. And that is of no help to any of us, especially when you're, trying to keep a democracy going in the right direction. I think all of that relates to how we interact with the information that we're processing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one of my hopes for this podcast, and just how I try to engage with people in general, is that we live in this world that is hyper polarized, and nuance seems to be something that's just gone out the window. Like, everything is reduced to tweet length. Every argument is this absolute binary, like you're for something or you're against it, you're good or you're bad. And I hope that in doing longer conversations, even if I'm wrong about some things, even if I don't have the full picture, at least there's a little bit more space for more analysis of what's going on and a little more nuanced view, and taking other perspectives, I think, is an important part. So I'm trying to do my part to contribute to a little bit more substantive conversation around some of the issues.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think one of the things too is we are all mindful of this concept that, listening is one thing. Sometimes people say you're not listening, and the answer is I am listening, but we just didn't agree, right? Some people will say things to you and they want you to agree with them, and that's not really listening. Listening is listening to a person's thoughts and ideas and acknowledging their sort of humanity in the exchange, even when we don't agree with the outcome, right? Some people will say, I'll give an example, as to a development, like, you didn't listen to what the people were telling you. Well, it's not true. I think I try very hard to listen to everyone. It doesn't mean that I'm not listening to you if we don't agree. And therein lies the rub. Some people equate listening with agreement, and that's just not true. And of course, listening is, it's a verb, right? It's some active activity, in my view, because you're trying to understand what a person's thought process is. Sometimes you're trying to figure out their position relative to their lived experience. And you want to be responsive and thoughtful about the views that people have, because they're often deeply held and people are very passionate about it. But the hard part is when in an elected life, you've got to ultimately make a decision. And sometimes you're not going to make the decision that a person who has given you and poured their heart and soul to you about really wants you to make. And in that way, that's the difficulty, of course, of being in elected life. You can't please everybody all the time. You're trying to do your best with the information you have. And sometimes you're going to let people down. And sometimes people are not going to agree with the decisions you make. And hopefully people agree with the majority of the decisions you make. That's why they put you into office. But it's not always that way. So you're right to make all those observations, I think. And certainly I do think that a podcast like this is how you contribute positively to the conversations that are happening.
Yeah, that's what I hope to do. I think that the podcast format is good for that. And I'm just trying to do my best job as someone who, again, doesn't have a background in debate, and I'm not a journalist and I'm not a reporter and any of those things. But I think that it's nice to think that a typical person can, if they want to, engage in, substantive conversation around things that matter. Let's talk about Pride. It's Pride Month, and I'm super excited that the Northern Nevada Pride is coming back. So let's talk a little bit about Pride stuff. First thing I think is, why do you think that the representation and visibility and stuff matters? Like, we just painted the rainbow sidewalk by the Reno Arch. Pride parades are the biggest, visible sign, but there's also so much more in the media and like companies, and, it's visibility is major. Why do you think that's such a important key for especially, young LGBTQ people? Can you just talk a little bit about visibility of the LGBTQ community, both here in Reno and just in general?
Yeah, this is an important topic to me. I'm the first openly gay elected member of the city council. It means something to me because I'm a part of that history. Obviously, I'm standing on the shoulders of some people who've come before me, whether that's Harvey Milk or David Parks here in Nevada. And so I take very seriously that responsibility. And you've raised a good question about visibility. And I suppose it boils down to this adage that we say sometimes in council, which is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And for LGBTQ folks, they certainly have a voice that's deserving to be heard. They have a lived experience that's important to contribute to the conversation. Because at the end of the day, when you're in the throes of making policy and trying your very best to make policies that are appropriate for more people than just, I will say the average Joe Q or Jane Q public, you want to have those diverse views. And so representation matters. If you think about the ways in which policy choices are made, obviously, I think that even just my being on the city council is an important statement about this community. And having been elected now in my own right, it tells you that people value and see you as a person, that they're not going to tolerate hate towards any particular group. And as for young people, my hope is that young people looking out at the world will see themselves as having every opportunity that they want to accomplish, so that a person who is, perhaps struggling with their identity and trying to come to terms with their sexuality, they will say to themselves, I am worthy and a valid person. And I see examples of people who are living kind of the life that I want to live, or that they're living happy and full and productive lives, and that they don't have to be ashamed of who they love and how they love. And so, again, you said it right too about small things, right? Yeah, Oreos can put out a gay pride cookie and we can celebrate that. And we can have corporations who are acknowledging their employees by putting them in parades and floats, and we can paint a sidewalk in Reno. But at the end of the day, all of that, I think, is a good thing because it contributes to a greater sense of tolerance and acceptance and a love for people and community. So it's been certainly part of my platform as an elected is to increase the diverse representation of this community. And so it should be reflected in the fact that we all are different, and in our differences, we can become stronger as a community. And that the diversity that we seek will make us stronger, not only as a city, as an organization, as a region. I'll give you an example. When we unveiled the Pride sidewalk under the arch, I guess about a week ago, we were there and it had just been painted and the public works people were coming off the street. And we had a couple who came and said, "Can we take a picture with you?" And I said, "Well, you don't really want a picture with me. You want a picture with the mayor." She was there. She was gracious enough to take a picture. So I took the picture and I said, "Well, where are you from? Is this home?" They said, "No, we're from Austin, Texas." And we were just here and we saw the commotion. We thought, what was this? And so they wandered down and they said, "Well, we made the right choice to come to Reno, right, for a vacation, because we appreciate that you acknowledge this important month and that you have welcomed us to this city with this beautiful art display." And so that is kind of in small measure and just an anecdotal way of saying that representation matters, right? That who we are and who we love is available to people to be seen and be heard. And I think it's an important part about, certainly what I want to communicate to people. And I'm pretty open. We live very out loud on social media. And my story is pretty well known, I think, at this point. And so if you're an open book to people, they'll accept you for who you are, I think, and allow you to do the things that you dream and hope for.
Yeah. There were a couple questions from my friend Daniel for my Q&A episode last week that I didn't answer, but I will pass along to you because you might be a good person to answer these. He asked me if I remembered my first Pride that I went to, and I don't know that I really do, but I'm curious of your experience of attending Pride here in Reno or otherwise. And then he also asked how Reno's LGBTQ community and acceptance has changed over the years. And I was gone for most of my adult life, but you were here. So tell me about kind of early Pride experiences and then what you've seen change in Reno over the years in terms of LGBTQ acceptance.
Yeah, my first Pride, I think, is probably within the last, I want to say 10 years for sure. And I went to Pride in San Francisco, which is like the, godmother and godfather of all prides. It's a big celebration. And I was in a city that I was not really particularly familiar with at the time, and I went to Pride, and there was a moment where I was just, I think, standing on Market Street near the Castro and said to myself, I can do this. I can be fully me. I can be proud and prideful of who I am and who I love and who my husband is. I think it mattered to me, and it was also just simply about community and seeing and looking around and seeing other men and women and trans folks who were living their authentic self and understanding who they were in relationship to one another. I think a lot of times we're all like pinballs in a pinball machine. We're bouncing off each other and bouncing off of careers and bouncing off of constraints. But at its core, we want to be loved and we want to be seen. And all of those things are what comes from Pride. Now, Pride locally has a fairly long history, quite frankly. We have some history that dates back to even the gay rodeo is an example, I think, of being out and proud of who you are. And this is something that existed in our community for a long time. It doesn't exist here locally anymore. But Pride itself, we've had a couple of dueling Pride groups in Reno over the years, and now we've kind of coalesced around one of them, and we'll celebrate this year in July. Some people ask me, why do we have Pride in July when June is like the National Pride Month? Well, you kind of have it when it's appropriate for your community, and our Pride is in July because it's sort of tied to Art Town. And, Las Vegas does their Pride in October because it's better weather there in October than it is in June. I've been to Pride in London, Paris, Barcelona. I've been very fortunate, and it's just, it's awesome. It's a celebration. It's a party. It's an opportunity to, live out loud and in the open and not be fearful of who we are. And so I think, in terms of my lifetime, I've lived here my whole life and was born and raised here. I think we're a very welcoming and diverse community. I really have been nurtured and loved by this community my whole life. I wasn't always truly authentic with who I was, so my story is a little different than some other folks. So I am, we'll call it a late in life gay. I came out when I was 30. And so some of those years that, I might have otherwise been out enjoying Pride a little bit more or a little bit more creatively, I was not out and proud. But in my adult life, it's really been focused on, just developing community, enjoying the diversity within the LGBTQ community too is pretty amazing to me. Parts of the community that I really didn't have a lot of experience with, I've come to learn to love. And so that whole rainbow is awesome and certainly worthy of being celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One of the things that comes up a lot during Pride Month is criticism of like rainbow capitalism and performative allyship. And I think it sometimes gets oversimplified and things that are wildly different from each other get dumped in the same bucket. So you might have companies that are relatively actively anti-gay, contributing to anti-gay politicians, supporting anti-gay policies, but then Pride Month comes around and they have like a rainbow logo and they're saying, oh yeah, we're accepting, but really behind the scenes, they're not. So there's things like that are, I think, a real problem, but they kind of get labeled as, okay, that's just performative allyship. And then there are things like the rainbow on the sidewalk in Reno, which is, I think, clearly a good thing for everyone, but then that'll get dumped in performative allyship. And I think those different competing ideas of like, false allyship or just pretending to be supportive really diminish the ability for some of these real actions that are inclusive and make our city more welcoming. I don't want that bundled in with, like a rainbow painted missile from a military contract or whatever. Like those are very different things. What's your take on the good versus bad type of allyship? Like, is there such thing as bad allyship? Is this rainbow capitalism a real problem? What's your view on that? I know that's a little bit more kind of like a national political issue, maybe a little hot button, but what's your view on the rainbow capitalism debate?
Yeah, Poir, who's a modern theorist and philosopher, talks a lot about pinkwashing. And so in that regard, I'm sure that there are things where we can point to where some corporation we don't agree with, Raytheon, has made their logo, a rainbow. And no, we're not entirely looking for that, but nor should we be dismissive of it. I think that when you're a Raytheon employee and you're gay or LGBT or trans, any of those parts of the flag, it is, I think, reassuring to see that your employer acknowledges your existence in some way. And no, I don't think we should settle for that, but I also don't think that we should attack everything as being performative. Certainly, I'm a gay man and had a significant role in making sure that we had a rainbow crosswalk that was built or laid down. And I can't be a performative ally because I am gay and I'm not performing for anyone. I'm just happy to have celebrated it with the city, and certainly sometimes I want to just say to folks, can't we enjoy nice things too, right? Yes, there are lots of things that we can do better, but they don't always have to be lumped in with the things that we do. I think we should celebrate the good things that we can do, and we could obviously disagree about some of the things that are more complex and what we're working towards solutions on, but to dismiss them, I think is not right either. And I will tell you, in the response to the rainbow flag being painted on the crosswalk, I've had an outpouring of text, emails, and sometimes they're, or I'll give you another example. We had Drag Queen Story Hour about a year and a half ago, which was all over the media and created some drama. And, when a parent of a 5-year-old trans child reaches out to you and says, hey, thank you for sticking up for my family and for my child, you just have to say, okay, we're doing the right thing, right? Or when you meet two people on the street who are like, hey, we're trans and we're so very thankful that your city acknowledges that we exist, right? Even if the acknowledgement is small or some people observe it to be performative, other people believe it to be of value and beautiful. And so you can't, appease everyone all the time, as we said earlier. I think you look for the commonality, which is be motivated by kindness, be motivated by love. And if your decisions and the actions you take are motivated in that way, you'll get the response which is correct. So I'm not a big fan of bopping everybody on the nose all the time. I think we should celebrate the good things we can do, and we can fight for the things that we need to fight for.
Excellent. I think that's a perfect answer. I couldn't agree more. What's Pride going to be like this year? I'm excited it's back. We didn't have Pride last year because of pandemic, right? So I've noticed at all of the events that are happening, people are excited to be out and about. I went to Food Truck Friday and it was an absolute zoo. I think people are going to be out in numbers, right? What do you predict for Pride 2021 in Reno?
Well, I predict it'll be hot. That's the first thing. There's obviously going to be a parade. I heard that the mayor may be doing roller skates and drag queens. So you didn't hear it from me, but that is what I did hear. So you might see our mayor on roller skates, and like I said, there could be an armada of drag queens involved. But it'll be fun. Whatever it is, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be an opportunity to spend some time outside in Wingfield Park. Our center, which is the organization that's the parent now and runs Pride as a fundraiser, is really, they've done some incredible things, and they have created an event that is, obviously it is celebrating LGBTQ folks, but it's for everybody. I go down there and there's folks who are straight, there are kids, there are old people. It's, racially diverse. It is really an opportunity for people to just come out and be happy. And I know there's a lot of folks who walk down the street and pass out beads and say Happy Pride. Those are kind of the things that I look forward to every year. There's musical acts, there's food vendors, there's people selling cool stuff. I don't know. It's going to be an exciting time, because I do think you're right. People are ready to get back to a greater sense of normalcy, and they missed out on it last year. So this year, I imagine, would be a big party.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm glad it's back. I do have a couple questions about kind of current political issues. Like I said, I'm not really a news podcast, and I don't like that to be the focus. But since I have your attention and can get your take on a couple things, I figure let's go for it. I did an episode you mentioned with Mike Van Houten from Downtown Makeover about development and all of these projects. And obviously the city council has some involvement in what happens and doesn't happen. Obviously, you're not in complete control of those things, but it's part of what people look to you for is, what do we want Reno to look like? How are we going to build? What is good development? What is bad development? My general take, as I talked with Mike about, is I'm very pro-density. I want walkable neighborhoods. I want public transit. I want multimodal transportation. I want bike infrastructure. I think those are all great things for Reno. We're seeing some of that type of development in town. We're also seeing more, suburban development and these like larger scale entire neighborhoods out, in the far reaches of Reno. What do you think we should be building in Reno? Where should we be building? And what is your involvement in shaping how Reno grows?
Yeah, obviously an important question to all of us. And I think, as I said earlier, I've lived here my whole life. Reno is definitely changed from, 70,000 people it was when I was growing up here. And we're heading towards, 300,000 people now, and we'll grow beyond that in my lifetime, I'm sure. Reno is, of course, constrained by its physical geography. So we're inside of the Great Basin and a bunch of bowls that are contiguous to each other, the North Valleys. So in some ways, we are constrained by the land and just the buildable area, because you either have to build up, so going vertical, I guess you could go up along the mountains, which is not something I prefer or most people appreciate, or you grow out. All of the easy places, of course, have been built, right? There are no easy places left, in my opinion. So you're looking at areas that, have some historical being prone to flooding. You're looking at areas that are interfacing with the wilderness environment that we're surrounded by. And you're looking at areas that are, very dense already and don't yet have the infrastructure to be able to support more growth. So you've got to plan for the future that you see. And my hope is, as a city council member, is that people accept that when projects come to us, by the time they come to the city council, because not all projects do come to the city council. Many projects are built without ever coming to the city council. And some projects that are dogs, for lack of a better word, never make it because they get killed off in the planning stages. They get killed off at the planning commission. So by the time they come to us, the projects are largely ones that, have been vetted by all the right players and all the right planners and meet all the legal requirements for a thing to happen. So our role is narrow, but our role is important because we are trying to craft the future we want to see for ourselves in this community. So my hope is that we build quality projects. I am certainly a fan of infill and denser projects because I think they are less taxing on our environment. They're less taxing on our resources because we already have sewers and infrastructure and police and fire service to them. So for my part, I favor that kind of development. I think people are critical at times because they are reluctant to change. When they see the world as they want to see it and they believe that the world will stay that way kind of for time immemorial. I'm the at-large council member, which means I represent the entire city. And so I don't focus as intensely on each ward by ward development. I'm thinking about the bigger picture. How does it impact all of Reno? And so those are important parts of how I approach looking at the projects, because sometimes if you're only thinking about what's happening in your ward or only listening to the folks in your ward, you lose sight of the fact that, we have a housing crisis here. We have a crisis of infrastructure. We have some water constraints that are looming. So we've got to look at the big picture and we've got to have thoughtful and responsible growth. Those words become buzzwords because people apply them in all sorts of different ways. At the end of the day, you do everything you can with the information that's presented to you to look at the project, who's building it, who are they hiring as, consultants. Do those people have a good track record with you or a bad one? And you do the best you can within the legal constraints of what the law says your role is in it. Obviously, I'm a lawyer, so I think very critically about what the code says, what the zoning requirements are, what are the things that the law says can happen on a particular place. And those sometimes are my focus because my background is a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. The housing and development stuff also ties in with cost of living, which is directly related to homelessness in Reno, which has become a very big issue in recent weeks and months and years, really, but especially just very recently. I know that last week there were some protests and then there were talks with the mayor that I've heard described by both sides as being really productive. What's the dynamic between the city council and the homeless advocate community? And is there opportunity for partnerships and working together? I think I see kind of this combative stance a little bit. And I wonder if there's a way to shift that to more partnerships and working together. So do you think that's a possibility? And do you think that you and the city council are being fairly portrayed or represented in some of these conversations?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there in your question. I'll say a couple of things. Number one, we are a country that's built on protest. So protests are a valuable and valid way of communicating frustration and of change. So the language of protest is something that I appreciate very much in terms of my belief that it is at its core a very democratic thing to engage in. And so when folks have a grievance and they are not having that grievance resolved in a more traditional route by, a meeting or a hearing or whatever, and they feel like the only way for them to move forward as to their issue is to protest, I believe that's a valuable thing, quite frankly. And I believe that we should honor and accept that those protests are a legitimate form of communication. So that's the first thing I'll say. Second is As to our unsheltered population, it is complex, and everyone uses that word to describe it. It is certainly not something that's new. My entire lifetime, I have been involved in various ways in housing, involved in food banks, and been involved in conversations about how do we honor our most vulnerable community. And so for my part, I don't see it as a recent phenomenon. I see it as a lifetime of understanding and working towards solutions. And sometimes that can be frustrating because when you get into government, you imagine that you will make all these monumental changes and they will happen immediately. And when you sort of bless and release a thing, that it'll go out and happen. And what I've had to learn in the last couple of years is, government is not really great at everything it does. In fact, there are some things that it does very poorly. And sometimes government takes a lot longer than it should in terms of what we expect is reasonable in terms of timing or resource allocation, or even just, being thoughtful about an issue. And so I fundamentally believe that what we have to have is folks who come together and form coalitions to solve a thing. So that means we'll call them the advocate community, working with the faith-based community, working with the private community, working with the city, who's working with the state and the county and the federal government. And all of these people have an important part to contribute. And of course, we can't leave out folks with lived experience from that conversation. And oftentimes, they're the ones who are left out most quickly. And I think we've made efforts, and I certainly make an effort to seek out people with lived experience, because I do not know, me personally, what it is like to be homeless in America or on the streets of Reno. And so I hope to elevate their concerns by asking them what the concerns are. So we all have a role to play. I hope that the feeling is not antagonistic. I think I said earlier, sometimes when you're in a conversation with people, they think you're not listening because you did not ultimately come to agree with them. And that is, again, something that I continue to believe happens. Sometimes the folks in the advocate community will say many things to me, and I will take the information in, and we won't agree on the solution. But at its core, what we are agreeing on is that people who are unsheltered and find themselves in a very difficult situation, either because of past trauma, mental health issues, addiction, human trafficking. A lot of things lead a person to becoming homeless. And at its core, I think everyone, including the city council members, the advocates, want to see people honored, that they want to see them housed and clothed and fed and had their basic needs met. And where we disagree sometimes is about how to get there. And so if we start from the sort of end point, which is the goal, and work backwards, I think we tend to find commonality. I was not at the meeting last week, and there have been some meetings that have occurred since then. And I think you've rightly described them as productive, in as much as dialogue and thoughtfulness towards a goal and people communicating is far better than people ignoring each other or getting very siloed. And so we have a great deal of work ahead of us. I think too, you probably know, but I'll share with your readers, the city of Reno is not the best place for folks who are being cared for in this way to be cared for, because we don't have the social services infrastructure that's needed to be successful. And so we are working with our region here, the county and the city of Sparks, to transition homeless services out of the city of Reno and to the county. And the county also has the financial wherewithal to sort of decide how they want to pay for those services. So remember, we talked at the very beginning of your show about the charter obligations of a city, and their, police and fire and parks and recreation, and the list is very short. None of those include, the provision of homeless services. So what the city has been doing for the last, I'll say 20 years, is really standing in the gap in an area that they didn't have a lot of role or responsibility in, but they've done it because they felt it was the right thing to do. And we're not intending to just go away or disappear or, pay money towards a thing and then wash our hands of it. But we do believe that regionally we've got to attack some of the causes of being unsheltered and the wage inequality that occurs in the city and the lack of affordable housing regionally rather than, here at the city of Reno as, one entity. So again, lots of stuff there. We could have an entire, 20-hour podcast about houselessness but I think those are my thoughts kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah. I don't want necessarily to do every episode about the unhoused situation in Reno. I've done a couple episodes, and obviously there's a lot more to talk about as well, but I'm glad that we were able to talk about that a little bit. I have a couple more questions around that, if you don't mind, just short ones. I know the Safe Camp is opening this week, which I'm excited about. I think that safe camping is a huge part of the solution, so I'm glad that that is going to be up and running, but it's limited on space. So can you kind of give us an idea of what's next? So we have the CARES campus has opened. It has a lot of capacity. The Safe Camp is opening. That has some capacity, but we're going to run into a situation of things being full again. So what's the kind of short to medium term of next steps once we're running into capacity issues again?
Yeah, the Nevada CARES campus has a bunch of different, we'll call it phases or prongs. Obviously, the first one and the most pressing one was a shelter, which was sufficient size to handle the capacity of folks who need emergency temporary shelter. It's not intended to be a long-term solution. At the time that was being built, we really asked those with lived experience why they were unwilling to go to a shelter, and some of them basically said, we prefer camping. And what we looked at is models around the country where people were, the barriers to going to a shelter to seek the kind of services that you could receive there included things like, well, they can't let me have our pets there, and I prefer to be outdoors, or I feel safer outside and I don't want to be indoors. So pretty quickly they decided that we would try a pilot program, and really the camping element of it should be viewed as that. It is a test balloon, right? A trial run at whether or not we want to, as a community, have safe camping. Now, I am a person who has been advocating it for the entire time I've been on council, and I think it is a necessary component and a critical component of meeting the unique needs of different subpopulations within the unsheltered population. So you're right. I think it has 44 individual slots. They start opening tomorrow. I talked with the Karma Box Project folks, Grant Denton, who you had on your show. I thought his episode was brilliant, by the way, great guy. But it's too small, right? But again, it is a test run at it. So it's trying to see, can we do this and how will we do it well? So that if it is successful, that we might consider expanding it. We might consider having more of them differently located so that, sometimes some folks do not interact well with other folks within a population. So we don't want to put them all at the same place and expose them to each other in such a way that is not successful for them to get into their individual journeys, right? And so I'm a person who believes that we can have safe camping. It has to be safe for the residents. It has to be a place where they can call home, that we ought to have more of them. Certainly 44 spots or slots or campground sites is too small. I'm also someone who says we should have safe parking. We should, where people could live out of their cars for a time being and try to get into services that would allow them to come out of their car. We should have RV areas where people can stay without the threat of, being removed or legal action. Ultimately, the goal of all of these things is to find solutions for people to get into permanent supportive housing. The third phase of the Nevada CARES campus really addresses that. The project, I think total was about $16 million, and $5 million of that was a collaborative effort by the Reno Housing Authority, which bought the adjacent parcel, which is 5 acres, and on which they will build somewhere in the range of 400 to 500 apartment-style homes. And so that is phase 3, and they're currently out trying to fundraise to make that a practical reality. But eventually, on that campus, we will see permanent supportive housing, I would say within the next 3 to 5 years. And that will add housing stock there so that a person can come into as a low barrier entry shelter into the shelter, and they can cycle out of there as quickly as possible into other forms of housing, whether that's the Village on Sage Street, which is dormitory style housing, Hope's Village, which are small, tiny homes, which have some central kitchen opportunities, or a permanent housing complex, which will be down there, which will be run by Reno Housing Authority.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that there's a plan and that the idea is to continue to add capacity. As Grant talked about, using the CARES campus as a launch pad to stable, supportive housing, long-term housing. So I'm glad to hear that that's the plan. One last question on the unhoused thing. This is just something that's come up in the last day or two. Is I guess there's a planning commission meeting or something like that happening today, and there's concern about criminalization of feeding the unhoused community. I'm not sure what the actual rule is right now, and I don't know what the intent is in the future. It's very concerning for a lot of people. I understand that we want to make sure we have centralized services, things like that, but the idea of criminalizing feeding the homeless is really a big issue. And there's a couple of organizations that do this direct outreach who are kind of raising the alarm. What's the reality of that situation? Do you know what's going on with it? What is your view on it? What should people think about what's happening around these direct aid actions and the city's approach to them?
Yeah, for my part, I will just say, first and foremost, I have not spent the amount of time I would need to spend to give you a fully formed opinion. Things go to the Planning Commission largely at times because they're staff driven and they start as a staff issue. Here, the idea was that they had to revise some portion of Title 18 because as the crow flies, you cannot have the provision of food services within 600 feet of residential. And if you go across the freeway from where the CARES campus, you have residential. So currently the CARES campus is a non-conforming use to that area, right? And so Title 18 had to be opened up, is the word, and that provision has to be revised in order to make the thing that we are doing there a conforming use so that folks who live, in this case, across the freeway, don't have a legitimate beef about providing services there in the food services capacity. So that's the first thing. That is the absolute core part of why Title 18 is being opened up. Now, as to mutual aid groups or Puff Puff Pass the Love, Burrito Project, Sandwiches on Sunday, there's a number of different groups that have had a history of providing healthy alternatives and meals to folks in need. And we should be encouraging that, of course. We want to make sure that human beings who want to help other human beings can continue to help those human beings. So I don't know beyond that, there was no effort on the city's part to target any organizations or groups or run them out of town. So certainly no effort to criminalize, as you use the word, those efforts. Our entire society has an element of it that's based on charitable works, right? And so if people want to make burritos and put them in banana husk and pass them out, that's awesome. And we should continue to do that. So I'll be interested to see what the conversation is about. It's not something that is, I've again fully studied. I'll just say that I appreciate the work that groups like Puff Puff Pass the Love and the Burrito Project are doing, and they'll have my support as we move forward, and we'll figure out what we need to do to make sure they can continue to be successful.
That's great to hear. Yeah, by the time this airs next week, we're recording this on Wednesday, the 16th, and I know that meeting is today, so things may have changed in the next week or so by the time this episode comes out. I'm glad to hear that your view is supportive of this kind of direct outreach, because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle as well. So let's shift to the future of Reno. Exciting things in Reno. What are you looking forward to as we're coming out of COVID? Our economy is, I'm hopeful, looking to bounce back. I think we've weathered it relatively well. I mean, some businesses have gone out over the last year, but tourism hopefully is coming back a little bit. Events are doing well. What's your optimistic view of Reno in 2021?
Yeah, I am an optimistic human being by nature, so I'm always seeing the glasses half full. I think the future of Reno is very bright. We've continued to diversify our economy. My hope is that as we diversify the economy, that we don't leave people behind, which means wages need to increase, and support for trade and labor unions and apprenticeship programs needs to be there. But as a community, we're going to continue to bump along and develop at a certain pace. Some people say it's too fast. Some people say it's too slow. I like to think that we're trying to measure it just right. We are a university and college town, And where the university goes, I think we tend to be successful in working with them. So I'm excited to see how the university rebounds through COVID. Obviously, our small businesses are, they've had a very challenging year and a half. I think many of them are climbing out of it, but there are certainly going to be folks who have also been left behind in that process. So I'm hopeful that as we look forward to the remainder of 2021, that really we're focusing on people, small businesses, the university, growing our, parks and recreation programs. And of course, as you said earlier, addressing the needs of our unsheltered population. So we've got a lot of work to do, and every day you just get up with some sense of resolve to doing the work and to making sure that the diversity of this community is reflected in the policy choices we make. And hopefully, while everyone won't agree with you all the time, you hope to do the best you can for as many folks as you can for as long as you can.
Yeah. And last thing I got for you, a lot of people are moving to Reno. So Reno is growing because people are coming here from out of state, from other places around the country. What's your message to Reno newbies? What do you want the people who are moving to Reno to know about Reno? What's a good way to be a part of the community? If a lot of people who listen to this podcast, I've gotten messages, they're saying, oh, I just moved to Reno and I found your podcast. So for folks that are new in town, what's the message from Devon Reese?
Yeah, well, welcome. First of all and foremost, we're happy to have you. It is an incredibly gracious community where I think people can be successful and happy and healthy. Enjoy, the beautiful, abundant nature, and enjoy all that this community has to offer by getting involved. Right? Find your people, find your group, find your your coffee shop, and find the things that make you happy. We've got. There's a lot to be unpacked with Reno. It's kind of like an onion, lots of layers. There's some gritty old parts. There's some hip new parts. There's the confluence of where those things meet. And I think Reno does offer something for everyone. But at its core, what it offers is, I think, a gracious group of human beings who are committed to growing and moving together and hoping that we build a better future for the next generations.
Excellent. What did we miss? Anything else that we didn't talk about today that you want to chat about or bring up while we have a couple minutes?
Well, I mean, I think a couple of things we could spend time talking about are, parks and recreation. Obviously, I'm very proud of the city's commitment to growing its parks and recreation department back to where it was, prior to 2007, 8, 9. We've made commitments to expand our park opportunities. We've finally, after 20 plus long years, agreed to fully fund the Moana Pool project, which is a very exciting thing. We just committed a 30-year agreement with the folks out at Rosewood Golf Course to create a nature preserve and study area. And so this council very much values recreation and parks and the natural beauty of this community. So that's something I think that we should be celebrating and be happy for. So that's sort of an important part of where I think we're headed, which is to really grow and honor our park resources. So that's a cool thing. Let's see, what else could we talk about? We could talk about, Reno, I think is becoming a great incubator for entrepreneurship and has been for many years a place for arts and artists to thrive. And in some small ways, those things are starting to merge, right? When you start to look at the growth of this community and see folks, as you said, they're moving here. And the reason why they're moving here is because we got something special, right? And we do some cool things here and things that you can't do other places. So I think people will continue to enjoy art in all its rich beauty, whether that's murals, whether that's Art Town, whether that's some of the great theater companies we have here. There is really something for everyone in that regard. And some of that is being borne out into business opportunities. So look for Reno to continue to be a hub of entrepreneurial spirit, angel investors. And when those things start to line up with things like art and technology, I think special things are on the rise and on the horizon for us.
Excellent. Well, that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Devon. It is always so great to talk to you. I really appreciate your ability to explain what you're about and what you care about and why Reno is so important in a way that really resonates with me. And I always enjoy talking to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a privilege, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you through your podcast, because I think it's a great way to know about what a person is thinking about, what they value. And you've had some great guests, so I'm happy to be a part of that list. And I know that at some point in time, you'll have all the big ones on here.
Hopefully. We'll see how it goes. Thanks again, Devon.
Be well.
Listeners, thank you again for tuning in to this week's episode of Renoites. An extra special thanks to Devon, my guest this week. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you enjoyed this episode or any other, please do me a favor and share it. Let people know about the podcast. I don't do a lot of advertising and promotion, so the way that people find out about this show is from the people that they know. So feel free to share this episode. Let people know about the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will keep on tuning in. That's all I got for you this week. See you next time.